Thank you all for coming, and my name is Sonali Kanote, and I'm a member of a new grassroots group called Unity Racine, and this is the first of 3 events we're doing this week. Today's one is today, and then we have one on Friday, and then the last culminating one is on Saturday. So today we have 2 absolutely fantastic speakers. I'm going to introduce the first speaker, and then Dave will introduce the second speaker. Jim Carpenter is going to tell us aspects of the war that we hardly ever hear in the mainstream media. This is a cliche, but we know that that truth is the first casualty of war. And Jim will shed some light on facts that will help us better understand the conflict, the human cost of this war, and what our role might be in affecting change. And we do have to believe that we can affect change. Jim is the recipient of the Peacemaker of the Year Award from Peace Action Wisconsin. And please welcome Jim Carpenter.
Well, I want to thank everybody for taking time to come out here today. And I love to see unity in the room here because so many issues are connected. The environment, the war, racism, poverty, they're all connected. So I'm not going to talk to a lot right now. I'm going to rather have you watch this. And Sonali's right. Truth is the first casualty of war. The person you're going to see on screen will not be put on mainstream media. It's Democracy Now! I'd suggest that you watch it every once in a while because you'll hear things on Democracy Now! That you won't hear on CBS, ABC, MSNBC, and all the other ones. And I just want to say that I believe war is one of the greatest follies of man. I'm an economics instructor, and one way of looking at economics, the purpose of economics is to organize the factors of production in order to produce. So let me repeat that. The purpose of an economy is to organize the factors of production in order to produce goods and services to meet our needs and our wants. The purpose of war is to organize the factors of the production in order to destroy goods and services and life itself. So in economics class, I taught that war is like the anti-economy. It's the exact opposite of what an economy is supposed to do. So it's totally insanity for us to have war based on that concept. Spiritually, it's insane too, right? Because spiritually, the purpose is to unite with one another, to recognize God and everyone, and you can't do that in war. Of course, you have to dehumanize the enemy in order to kill the enemy. And so the war is sort of like the anti-spirituality too. So it's really crazy, and I've spent a lot of years of my life focusing on how to get rid of war. If you ever want to learn more about getting rid of war, abolishing war, there should be a movement to abolish war. You can go to worldbeyondwar.com. Their mission is to abolish war, worldbeyondwar.com. But specifically, I want to talk tonight about Ukraine and the horrible dilemma that Ukraine poses for us, because this war is a disaster. It has to end. And let's make no mistake about it. Putin is a terrible criminal. The invasion of another country is always a crime. He's mass murdering people. There's also torture going on. There's destruction of infrastructure, and there's children are being kidnapped. These are all horrible crimes, and it has to end. But to put things in perspective, our own country has been guilty of horrible crimes. I'll just make a couple quick statements here about our own country. The Vietnam, I was a conscientious objector during Vietnam. I worked in a hospital instead of going to war. And I remember reading in National Geographic that my mother had sent me every year for my birthday, a story about babies in Vietnam. and they showed pictures of babies, and where their eyes were supposed to be, there was their forehead. Their eyes never came into their body when the fetus developed. Why? Because of Agent Orange that we dropped on their country. I mean, this is a horrible crime. I remember being at an anti-war rally. A veteran from Iraq was speaking. He said, you know what? I was in a convoy, and we were told, we were ordered that if a child runs in front of the convoy, just run over the child. So the point being is that it's both autocracies and democracies are guilty of these horrible war incidents, and war should truly be abolished. But after this video, the question is what to do about the Ukraine war, because it is a horrible crime. Yet, the dilemma is, if we try to allow Ukraine to achieve ultimate military victory, this is a prescription for the risk of nuclear war. And that's what many people, experts, more expert than me, foreign policy experts, are saying, that if Ukraine and Zelensky tries to take back all of their territory, not just the territory that they've taken in 2022 and 23, but the territory taken since 2014, including the Crimea. If Ukraine tries to do that, it would be a complete humiliating victory for Putin, and it risks nuclear war because, as Kennedy said, and let me just quote Kennedy, and then I'll let you watch this. So JFK made this famous speech about peace at a university commencement ceremony, and he says, above all, while defending our own vital interests, nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. To adopt that kind of course in the nuclear age would be evidence only of the bankruptcy of our policy or a collective death wish for the world. But the policy now of Zelensky and Ukraine is to have a humiliating defeat for Putin and a hope that he doesn't use his nuclear weapons. Jeff Sachs will be arguing that does not make any sense. The only sensible end to this war is negotiation. Don't push Putin into a corner so that we risk nuclear annihilation. Have a negotiation, and that's the only sensible, sane way to end this war. So why don't we play the video?
The war in Ukraine and calls for negotiations. We're joined by Jeffrey Sachs. He's the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University and president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He has served as advisor to 3 UN Secretaries General. His latest piece is headlined A Mediator's Guide to Peace in Ukraine. He's joining us from Vienna, Austria. Professor Sachs, welcome back to Democracy Now! Why don't you lay out your thesis, your proposal for how this mediation can happen? We see there's a serious shift here. I mean, Macron with Biden at the White House, it was the first state visit to the White House under the Biden administration of any world leader. And clearly this was a major subject of their talks, both Macron being a back channel to Putin, but also then President Biden himself saying he would speak with Putin. What do you think needs to happen?
I think both sides see that there is no military way out. I'm speaking of NATO and Ukraine on one side and Russia on the other side. This war, like von Clausewitz told us 2 centuries ago, is politics by other means or with other means, meaning that there are political issues at stake here, and those are what need to be negotiated. What President Macron said is absolutely correct, that President Putin wants political outcomes that, in my view, absolutely can be met at the negotiating table. Just to quote what Macron said in another interview, he said, one of the essential points we must address, meaning we, the West, as President Putin has always said, is the fear that NATO comes right up to its doors and the deployment of weapons that could threaten Russia. Much of this war has been about NATO enlargement from the beginning. And in fact, since NATO enlargement to Ukraine and Georgia were put on the table by President George W. Bush Jr. and then carried forward by the U.S. neocons basically for the next 14 years, this issue has been central, and it's been raised as central. But President Biden, at the end of 2021, refused to negotiate over the NATO issue, but now is the time to negotiate over the NATO issue. That's the geopolitics at stake. There are other issues as well, but the point is this war needs to end because it's a disaster for everybody, a threat to the whole world. According to European Union President Ursula von der Leyen last week, 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died, 20,000 civilians, and the war continues. And so this is an utter disaster, and we have not searched for the political solution. What's interesting, Amy, and I would emphasize it, is that inside the U.S., we're finally hearing about this. President Biden's statement was very consequential, but the week before that, perhaps as notable, was the statement of the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, who said, now is the time to negotiate. What we see is a big debate inside the administration between the neocons on the one side, and I would say those who see reality on the other side. Victoria Nuland, probably our neocon in chief in the administration, who's been part of this NATO enlargement from the start, said, no, can't negotiate. But others are saying, you know, it's really time. So this is a debate within the U.S. as much as it is a question of sitting down between the United States and Russia.
And Jeffrey Sachs, you've mentioned that there are 4 core issues that you believe need to be negotiated. You've written about these, not only the issue, obviously, of NATO enlargement, but also the issue of protecting Ukraine's sovereignty and security, and also the fate of Crimea and the future of the Donbass. Could you talk a little bit about those other issues, especially the fate of Crimea, because most Americans and the media in this country do not really cover the historic relationship of Crimea to Russia and its military importance to Russia?
Yeah, Juan, thank you very much. From the beginning, from before the beginning, from 2021, when Putin made clear what the political issues at stake were, but I happen to know this goes back in many ways back to 1990, 91. I was at that point an advisor to the economic team of President Gorbachev, and then later President Yeltsin and Ukrainian President Kuchma. So I've watched this from the start. There have been a few very important political issues at stake. One is the NATO enlargement. I think it is really the dominant issue, but 3 others are extremely important. Of course, I should say equally important is Ukraine's sovereignty as a sovereign country and in need of security arrangements. But NATO as Ukraine's security doesn't work. It's an explosive brew. So one needs to find, as President Zelensky himself said earlier this year before backing off from it, that there needed to be a non-NATO way to secure Ukraine, and there can be. So that's another crucial issue, is Ukraine's sovereignty and security in a non-NATO manner. The third issue that is very consequential is Crimea. Crimea, the peninsula, people can look on the map, the peninsula and the Black Sea, has been the home to Russia's naval fleet in the Black Sea, and therefore completely consequential for Russia's economic and foreign policy and military security since 1783. So this is, from Russia's point of view, an absolutely core issue. And incidentally, in 2008, when George W. Bush Jr. was very unwisely pushing NATO enlargement, President Putin said specifically to President Bush, in Bucharest at the time of the NATO-Russia meeting that if you push NATO enlargement, we retake Crimea. This was already explicit. And the point is that for Russia, this is vital. Now, after what happened, of course, in 1954, in a symbolic action, because there was a Soviet Union at the time, not separate nations, Nikita Khrushchev, the chairman of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the chairman of the Soviet Union, transferred Crimea from Russia to Ukraine. It didn't mean much. It was a celebration, a 300th anniversary of a treaty that Khrushchev celebrated by this administrative transfer. It became consequential after the end of the Soviet Union and the independence of Russia and Ukraine. There was a delicate balancing act for many, many years, especially in the early 2010s. Then President Viktor Yanukovych was negotiating with Russia to give essentially a long-term lease to Crimea to satisfy Russia's security desires and needs as a balancing, as a delicate balancing. But the United States very unwisely and very provocatively contributed to the overthrow of Mr. Yanukovych in early 2014, setting in motion the tragedy before our eyes. And that ended that delicate balance. Russia said, Crimea has to be ours because we just saw that we can't depend on a long-term arrangement with Ukraine. The United States contributed to the overthrow of a Ukrainian president who was negotiating with us over this core issue. So my view is that, and almost everybody that discusses this in private understands, Crimea has been historically and will be in the future effectively, at least de facto, Russian. And this cannot be the cause of World War III. We have to understand the centrality of this. We have been told about the centrality of this basically explicitly since 2008. The last issue on the table is a real issue, and that is the ethnic divisions within Ukraine itself, given the complex history of this region and the piecing together of all of the countries of this region from various times in history. Ukraine itself is ethnically divided. On the western part, it's ethnically Ukrainian, but complicated there too. But on the east, which is the Donbass, Lugansk and Donetsk, the two regions that are the center of this war, these are predominantly Russian, ethnic Russian, Russian-speaking, Russian Orthodox, and after Yanukovych's overthrow, the place where paramilitaries demanded independence of these regions or joining Russia, and Russia supported those paramilitaries, and autonomous or independent states were declared. What happened, and this is crucial to understand, is that in 2015, there were agreements to solve this problem by giving autonomy to these eastern regions that were predominantly ethnic Russian. And these are called the Minsk agreements, Minsk I and Minsk II. And in particular for Minsk II, the Europeans, especially France and Germany, said, we will be guarantors of that. But then Ukraine, under the post-Yanukovych regime, two presidencies, Poroshenko and Zelensky, refused to implement the Minsk II agreement, saying they're dead. We don't accept them. We don't accept autonomy. Russia said, well, you had a diplomatic agreement and now this is violated, and this became another cause of this war. And we need a resolution of the Donbass issue as well. Ukrainian sovereignty, no NATO enlargement, de facto Russian control over Crimea, some kind of solution like Minsk II some kind of autonomy, some solution for the Donbass. These are the four pieces that can save Ukraine, spare Russia, save the world from what is a growing disaster. And this is why we need a pragmatic approach.
Jeffrey Sachs, if I can, if you could briefly talk about how we're hearing virtually every week of a new announcement of more U.S. military aid and economic aid to Ukraine. How is this a constant stream of weapons and buttressing of the Ukrainian government either helping to end the war or helping to prolong it?
It is prolonging it, definitely. And I think both sides miscalculated. Putin calculated that the initial invasion would push Ukraine to the negotiating table and these political issues would be resolved. And frankly, in March, after the February invasion, there were negotiations, there were exchanges of documents. The mediators, the Turkish government, said we're coming close to an agreement. Indeed, both sides, both Russia and Ukraine, said we're coming close to an agreement. Then the Ukrainians walked away from the negotiating table. We don't know the full story to that. My own guess is that the U.S. and UK said you don't have to compromise in that way. There was a U.S. project for more than a decade to expand NATO, and I think there were forces in the administration that did not want to give up that project. And so Ukraine backed away from the negotiations and the war went on. Now, on the U.S. side, the calculation was that NATO weaponry, the HIMARS and others, combined with very tough economic sanctions, combined with freezing hundreds of billions of dollars of Russia's assets, combined with what the United States expected to be a worldwide agreement to isolate Russia, believed that this would bring the Russian economy to a state of collapse so that Russia could not continue to prosecute the war. This was also a serious miscalculation. Most of the world did not go along with the Western sanctions. Even in these votes in the United Nations, if you weight by the country populations involved, it's 20% of the world or 25% of the world that has voted against Russia, but most of the world not. The economic transactions of Russia with China, with India, with many other parts of the world have continued. The Russian economy has absolutely not collapsed. Russia has not run out of armaments. We have even reports today that some of these missile attacks have been identified by intelligence experts as newly manufactured. So this is not only the old stockpiles. So the Western calculation was wrong as well. Russia did not collapse. Neither side collapsed. We entered a war of attrition. To simply pump more money into this in an open-ended way right now is disastrous. It just means tens or hundreds of thousands of people killed, more, in addition to the 100,000 or more already dead among Ukrainian forces. It means continued disruption to the world economy, which is taking its toll all over the world. It's clear we need a political outcome. Neither side is going to win militarily the way they expected. The costs of this war are brutal. And what the administration is trying to do is put in another $40 billion without any real debate, because it wants to put it in an omnibus piece of legislation at the end of this year that has to be voted up or down, not on the Ukraine issues, but on the overall keeping government open issues. So we're not having that debate in Congress that we really need, because the opinion surveys are showing that more and more Americans say something's not right. Tens of billions of dollars, people dying, massive economic disruption. Where are the negotiations? And that's the real debate we need in Congress. But the administration's trying to stick in another $40 billion without that debate taking place.
To be clear, Professor Sachs, you've denounced Russia's invasion as violent of Ukraine.
I'm sorry, Amy, I
You've
missed the
denounced
opening.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Of course. Absolutely, this was a collision that is disastrous, and the cruelty of the Russian invasion is enormous. But the foolishness, recklessness of the U.S. neoconservatives to push to this point is also something that needs accounting.
Finally,
Because-
Professor Sachs,
Sure.
who would negotiate? Who would be the mediator that you're talking about, or mediators? We have 30 seconds.
Clearly, the Turks are extremely skilled. This is their region. They've been deeply involved. Pope Francis, the UN Secretary General, the UN Security Council, of course, which includes all of the major actors, all of these can play a role. But I would say Turkey, as a leader in the Black Sea region who knows all the participants, can do this. But this is not negotiation between Ukraine and Russia. This must be between the United States and Russia over the NATO issue, as well as Ukraine and Europe over the security issues that are so much at stake, and of course, Ukraine's core interests.
Well, Jeffrey Sachs, I want to thank you so much for being with us, economist and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network.
Yeah, so you can see this is quite complicated, but the idea that the war began in 2022 in February, of course, you can see by looking at what he said is not quite true, not true at all, actually. So back in 2014, the eastern part of Ukraine felt oppressed by the government. They wanted some autonomy, and the civil war began with the eastern part of Ukraine on one side and the rest of Ukraine on the other. They were Russian-speaking on the eastern side of Ukraine. The Russians jumped into the civil war. That's how that war started. And then there's the Crimea issue, and it's complicated, of course, but the thing to remember is that Crimea is home to Russia's naval fleet. It's been home to Russia's secured naval fleet since the 1700s, and it became part of Ukraine when Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine. But at that point, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, so it wasn't really giving Crimea to another country. And then when it became clear that the security of using Crimea for a naval base was at stake, Putin says if you put in a government that's going to take away that security of our naval fleet, we're going to take over Crimea, which he did. When the West, I don't know how many people follow this, it's complicated. When the West, our government, actually helped install a government in Ukraine that was favorable towards the United States rather than to Russia. So I just want to, just the last minute here, I was on the phone today with the staff of Tammy Baldwin talking about these very issues, urging Tammy Baldwin to push diplomacy and not a military solution to the war, because there is no sane military solution. And so basically, our ask was, please, Senator Baldwin, contact President Biden and ask him to begin peace negotiations now, work for a mutual ceasefire, and stop weapons shipments that escalate the war and undermine peace negotiations. So as you saw, Jeff Sachs was saying that more weapons only make things worse, that we have to get to the bargaining table. And Tammy Baldwin, in a previous letter to me, when I asked her if she would be willing to push diplomacy, she wrote back that basically this is all up to Ukraine, that it's their decision when the war is going to end and how the war is going to end. So I consider that person would be outrageous. The war wouldn't be taking place without the help of the West. Certainly we have something to say, because if it turns nuclear, we're all going, not only are we losing our money, but we all may lose our lives if this becomes World War III. So so I'm asking you to join me, join the peace movement, and asking Senator Baldwin and Senator Johnson to end this war by negotiations. Amazingly, there's been 11 Republicans who said we should stop funding the weapons in this war. Of course, they also said stop funding humanitarian aid. I don't agree with that, but I do agree with stop funding the weapons and let's get to the bargaining table. So I hope you would join us in that plea to Senator Baldwin. And as far as Gwen Moore, I'm from Milwaukee. Gwen Moore is my congressperson. There was 30 House representatives that signed a letter to President Biden saying, please focus on diplomacy. You can continue to send weapons, but focus on diplomacy too. Well, there was so much pressure on these 30 House members when they sent the letter to President Biden that they retracted the letter in 24 minutes. That's the power of the war fever in this country, to keep this war going. You can't even ask for diplomacy without getting a pushback from both the majority of Republicans and the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party, unfortunately, cannot be looked at as a party of peace right now. We'd love to see them become a party of peace. Okay, I know I've taken a lot of time, and if we have more time, we can talk later. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. My name is Dave Backman. I'm president of Reading Greater Racine, and by extension, I belong to Unity Racine as well. I also am a voter who went to my... Can you hear me now? Nope. Nope. How's that?
Yeah.
Oh. I also voted today for Supreme Court, the Supreme Court race, and I would urge everyone to do that. Decided to go early. Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my job as the segue from Jim's speech to Trevor's talk here today in the environmental concerns that the war is raising. Bear with me here for a second. Okay, here we go. So this is information from the BBC, which is one of my favorite sources of international news. I believe I get a lot better read on what's happening in the world than from American media. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused a large amount of warming gases to be released into the atmosphere. Ukraine has claimed at the UN Climate Summit in Egypt the amount is the equivalent of adding nearly 16 million cars to the United Kingdom's roads for 2 years. Ukraine is collecting evidence of environmental crimes with which to sue Russia. It has also claimed precious animal and plant life has been destroyed. The war has led directly to emissions of 33 million tons of greenhouse gases that warm the Earth's atmosphere. Russia has turned out natural reserves into a military base. And the war, we will, this is the statement from the Ukrainian government, because of the war we will have to do even more to overcome the climate crisis. So obviously some macro figures that war is very harmful to our planet overall. Personally, you know, I try my best as president of Reading Greater Racine to contribute to reducing my carbon footprint. And last April, my wife and I, well, I should tell you a family secret, my wife has had an ongoing love affair with another car for many years, and that is a Mini Cooper. And when the Mini Cooper came out 4 years ago with an EV version, all electric, we decided to start looking at it more seriously. So April came and our Hyundai Sonata was starting to show age, and it was time to turn it in. And so we ordered a 2023 Mini Cooper, all electric. And we found a dealer in Madison that had this vehicle, and we test drove another one out there. We liked it a lot. And the salesman said, okay, we're all set. You've got your down payment in, and you're going to collect $7,500 tax credit for buying this car. Pretty good incentive for buying a new car. But it's going to take a while. Our supply chains are messed up from COVID. There's a lot of factors that's happening in the world now. Oh, and by the way, all the wire harnesses for this vehicle you're buying are built in Ukraine. Wow. So it took until early September to get this vehicle. And all those months, my wife could have been polluting less. So there's a direct effect at the micro level on us, very small level, I guess, but it's, for me it was important. So we got the car. It's great. It's saving us a lot of money on gas. We had a charging unit put into our garage by neighbor's licensed electrician. He put it in, charged me $600. We're going to we'll recover that within a year to 18 months easily on what we're saving on our gasoline bill and not polluting the world. So I'd like to, with that, introduce Trevor. Trevor Young serves as Transit and Mobility Director for Ride Racine, the City of Racine's public transportation system. While in this role, Racine has electrified or secured funding for the electrification of almost 40% of its transit fleet. Launched a new vehicle locator application for the public, fostered greater institutional partnerships resulting in increased ridership, expanded micro-transit options, and reformed the management and employment structure of the transit department. Before assuming his current position, Trevor earned his urban studies degree from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and served 2 terms on the City of Racine Common Council, being the youngest elected to that role since 1862. After being adopted from an orphanage in Russia at the age of 2, Trevor was raised in Racine and is a proud product of its public schools. Trevor is grateful for the opportunity to give back and serve his hometown. Ladies and gentlemen, Trevor Young.
Thank you, David. Thank you for that story.
Guide to peace in Ukraine, as well to the last.
So before I begin, I just want to say that it's groups like this that make this work possible that we've done in City Hall, because this is new technology. This is the City of Racine going out and saying we're going to do something different. And so it really does take the public to say we're right with you in this vision to make our community a healthier, more environmentally conscious place. So with that, I just want to say thank you to this group and your activism. And I think I've seen almost everybody at public comment or either in the council chambers with former Alderman Mike Shields here as well. So I want to say thank you for your involvement. As was mentioned in the introduction, I was born in Russia, and so I think that it's interesting that we have this parallel here with these presentations. I was adopted when I was 2 years old and brought from an orphanage halfway across the world to Racine, Wisconsin. And so I am so grateful to be in this community and to be able to give back in any capacity that I can. And we have found that to be the cause of transportation. Because Racine, if we could put this in, let's see. Could I have a volunteer here to go slide to slide? Sure. I can do it.
What do you want me to do?
Just the next button. Okay. All right. So I'll see. So Racine is in the 3rd largest economic region in the United States, between Milwaukee and Chicago. It's in the 10th largest economic region in the world. So with that, you would think that we would be an economic engine, a powerhouse, a place where there is ultimate opportunity. But there are certain challenges that come along with that. We're also the largest city furthest away from an interstate corridor in the Midwest. So what it means is that we've got this regional asset that exists, being right in this metro region, but we're not leaning in on that and taking advantage of that. So how do we make sure that no matter where you are, what neighborhood you're in, you have access to opportunity to support yourself and your family? The answer to that is public transportation and infrastructure that meets the needs of those who don't have access to a personal vehicle. And people are making conscious decisions to not have a personal vehicle or to choose public transportation. So with that, we need to be a community of choice for that next generation of talent that says, I want to make Racine my home. So not only is this conversation around public transportation and electrification of our transit fleet a question of the environment, but it's also a question of Racine's economic vitality, Racine's health, and to break down barriers that create more opportunity for folks who have traditionally been left behind because of underfunded systems or because of a lack of planning to make sure that everybody can get ahead. And so that is the basis of public transportation conversations that should be happening in Racine. So to give a sense of what our public transportation system looks like today, we have 35 fixed route transit buses, 9 of which are currently on the road serving our community that are electric, and 4 more that are on the way, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure bill ushered through by the Biden administration. We have those buses operating on 10 routes that go all the way out to Grandview Industrial Park in Yorkville, to as far north as Caledonia and 3 Mile Road, to as far south as the Stephen Olson Industrial Park off of Chicory Road. So our transit system and the basis of it, the heart is the Crean Reed Owens Transit Center on State Street, and which is a 1902 historic transit center that formerly served as the KRM train station connecting downtown Chicago and downtown Milwaukee. And so that is the history and the background of our system. We have about 92 positions, and they are led in part by our general manager, Willie McDonald, who has been with the transit system for 30 plus years and is an absolute gift to the city of Racine. So anytime I have these conversations, I always give him a shout out because he makes sure the buses are running on time. So before the pandemic, the city of Racine's transit system serviced about 1 million unique rides. So if anybody ever says, nobody takes the bus, you know what you say? In 2019, we had over 1 million unique rides in our transit system. And we're recovering from the pandemic to today. So today we're seeing about 620,000 rides in 2022. That's a 17% increase from 2021. And we're anticipating that to be a dramatic increase in 2023 due to both partnerships with Racine Unified School District and our new PASS program with Gateway Technical College, which is a brand new partnership where if you were a student at Gateway Technical College, now you have access to the public transportation system for free. So that didn't happen before, and now it does. And I have to give our elected leaders credit for that, to cultivate an environment of collaboration and make sure that we break down those barriers for everybody, and especially students who are looking to advance their education. So that's a little 10,000 foot overview. Now let's get down to business here. Next slide, please. So what is really the benefit of electrification in our bus system, and how does multimodal transportation take that to the next level? So anytime you have a conversation about public transportation, it should also be a conversation about land use. Because if somebody has to wait for the bus on a without a sidewalk, on a busy road with vehicles speeding by them, that's not conducive to experiencing public transportation. So policy decisions should be made not just in how do we invest in public transportation systems, but how do we build an environment conducive to the bicyclist and the pedestrian. So that's why I stress multimodal transportation as a part of these conversations. So what are the benefits of electrification specifically? So for the environment, an average diesel bus in the city of Racine burns about 6,340 gallons of diesel a year. That's one bus. So that's about 64.4 metric tons of CO2 emitted annually for one bus. So because of the work that we've done to electrify almost 40% of our transit system, when they are all on the road engaged in revenue service, that's 13 buses. 13 times 6,340 gallons is 82,420 gallons of diesel that the city of Racine is going to save annually. That is just under 840 metric tons of CO2 that we're not emitting into the atmosphere. So that is a huge environmental benefit that the city of Racine, alone with one of its departments, is taking on to make sure that we're good stewards of our planet. So from an environmental perspective, it's the right thing to do, but where that energy comes from is also important, and we're going to be having that conversation as well. For public health, have you ever seen a diesel bus go by and the smog go in the air, after it's been at the stoplight for a while? Well, from a public health perspective, it's not that great to breathe in. So to have a clean electric bus that zips by without any emissions makes a great difference for air quality in our community as well. And then access and connectivity. The more that we're saving from a monetary perspective on our transit system by not investing in dirty fossil fuels, the more creative we can be around how we expand service, because we've got limited resources, but if we're smart with them and we innovate and we are conscious of the environment in our budget, we can expand service while protecting the environment at the same time. And then what does it do for the brand of Ride Racine and for the way people perceive our community and the way folks who utilize public transportation perceive the system that they use every day? It's modern. They see, as a passenger, they're worth investing in. And I think beyond everything else, there's huge value in that, to say those who take the bus, whether you're getting to work, going to school, going to a center of care, visiting your family, you're a priority for this community. So those are all the things that I see as a benefit for the electrification of our transit system. And from an economic perspective, just real quick, in 2021, we spent just under $600,000 on diesel. So to be able to cut that by 25%, to be able to cut that by 40% based on the size of our electric fleet, that's going to be of huge benefit. And especially as we see with international instability and the price of fossil fuel becoming enormous, this type of work is going to be that much more important. Next slide. So let's talk about the bus basics, and this might be a little technical, but I think it's interesting. So right now we have 9 electric buses on the road, 4 more on the way. We've got 35-foot Proterra ZX5 electric buses, which have 450 kilowatt hours of energy on board. So the interesting part of this technology is it's got regenerative braking. So anytime the bus is slowing down, to get to stop at a stoplight or to stop at a stop, that brake is actually charging up the battery. That friction is doing it. So that type of technology exists, and it's being utilized on the streets of the city of Racine today. Because of that, our routes on some of the coldest days still have about 175 miles of radius, and on our 10 routes, we don't have any routes that are that long in terms of our peak service. So we're able to keep those buses on the road and then have them go back to the garage and charge at night. In the summertime, which we're all hoping for summer, after those couple warm February days, we can get about 240 miles on a single charge. So that's exciting stuff, because that means that we can go back to the garage in the evening and have it charged at lower rates for re-energies at night when it's not peak service. So again, it's looking at this from an economic perspective to save the city of Racine valuable taxpayer dollars. So again, with taxpayer dollars, these buses are funded from grants, federal grants and state grants with the Volkswagen settlement agreement. So all of our buses that we're talking about today from an electric perspective have been funded externally from City of Racine local property taxpayers. So, and they've replaced old diesel buses that have been on the road for upwards of 12 years with over 500,000 miles on them that would have needed to be replaced anyway. So these are massive savings that are coming from the City of Racine and leaning in on future technology. So from a battery perspective, we talked about routes and range. From charging, we have a 1.2 megawatt charger that's being installed at our transit facility to be able to meet the needs of our electric bus fleet. So next slide, please. So solar, this is exciting stuff because a question we get often is, oh, well, you know, these environmental buses are great and all, but where does the energy come from? Is it a coal-powered plant? The great thing about battery buses is that the source of the energy is malleable. With a diesel bus, it needs diesel. With a battery electric bus, wherever the source of energy is, that's what can charge the battery. So if we think creatively and we lean in on new technologies, we can have green energy power our green bus fleet. So thanks to Senator Baldwin, who's been mentioned today, we have a $1.3 million appropriation from the infrastructure bill to be able to build a solar array on our transit garage site. So that infrastructure alone is going to have massive benefits to the operations of our transit fleet. And what's happening is during the day, we are going to generate energy that we're going to be able to send back to the grid, receive credits from We Energies, and it's going to save the city of Racine, again, some serious dollars when it comes to annual operations. And the energy that's going to be generated from this array alone will be able to fully charge 4 to 5 of our electric buses annually. So that's exciting. And I encourage that applause to go straight to our local leaders who signed up the City of Racine to the Paris Climate Accord, all the way up to our federal leaders like Senator Baldwin for advocating for the City of Racine. So next slide, please. So what was the timing on the funding of how we got to this today? So back in November of 2018, after the City of Racine Common Council signed on to the Paris Climate Accord, after the federal government stepped away from that, local leaders said, we're committing to a zero emission community and reducing our greenhouse gas footprint. And that commitment has resulted in stronger applications for state and federal dollars as we looked to engage in this work. So in November of 2018, we received about $6.2 million from the Volkswagen settlement agreement, which in brief was a result of Volkswagen lying on their emissions and a massive lawsuit from the federal government, which forced the company to provide billions of dollars.